Please be seated. The court is now back in session. The floor is once again given to the lead co-lawyers for civil party. Could you please inform the chamber how much time you need? Because the time allocation is also for the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will take about 45 minutes. That's sufficient. If I may proceed.
Yes, of course. And what about the prosecution? Because you only have this afternoon session before the break, and then your time allocation will be concluded.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will certainly conclude our examination within that time slot. I estimate approximately 20 to 30 minutes of questions from our side. Thank you.
Please try to rearrange the time allocations amongst yourself, because for you, for the prosecution and for the lead co-lawyers, your time will conclude at the break session, and there will be no extension after the break.
Much obliged, Mr. President, Your Honours. If I may proceed. Mr. Chownie, thank you for your patience so far and for so clearly answering the questions this morning. Good afternoon and welcome. When we last spoke, you were telling the court about your time when you arrived in Mung Rusai district in Battambang province and your time at Chaktom cooperative. I have just one question or one or two questions for clarification before we start talking more about Chaktom cooperative, and then we will go into the details of your time and your experience in Chaktom. In your earlier responses, you told the court that the time when you were on the train, after you had left Takeo, Trapeng Sap, and you're walking along the railway lines, and you were stopped by the Khmer Rouge militia, and you were forced on the train, you told the court that it was a very difficult time for you and your family, and that you felt because you didn't know where you were going, that you may be destined for death. Is that correct?
At that time, I didn't know where to go. I didn't have any particular destination in mind.
Thank you. And could you just remind the court, please, around the time, because earlier you had mentioned to the court that this is likely during the second phase of the transfer. So could you confirm to the court that when you were forced onto the train by the Khmer Rouge militia, that it was either late 1975 or early 1976? And how did you know that this was around the time period that you were forced onto the train?
At that time, it was not an absolute indication of the time. I thought it was in late 75 or early 76.
Thank you. We shall now proceed, Mr. Chowni, with a quick recap of what happened as soon as you arrived in Battambang province. As you mentioned earlier, because of the conditions, because you were forced to get onto the train by the militia, and because they did not tell you or your family where you were going, you told the court you thought you were destined for death. When you arrived in Battambang province, you mentioned to us as well that they used ox carts to transport you to the cooperative. Can you tell us who received you when you arrived in Battambang province and describe what they were wearing?
I did not know whether the person who wrote the ox cart was a militia or an ordinary villager. From my observation, the dress that they wore and the uniform that the Khmer Rouge soldiers wore were similar. I mean, they wore black clothing and they had a scarf around their neck.
Thank you. And when you met these people, what did they tell you and your family and the other people who got off from the train?
At that time, they did not say anything much. They asked us to get on the ox carts.
And when you arrived in Chaktom cooperative, what did the militia tell you then?
When we arrived at Chaktom, those militia used bad words toward the new people. We were considered the 17 April people. They called us the capitalist. They called us the feudalist. And these are the words that they used to call us. They accused us of plowing the rice field on the back of the peasants. And we were later put into separate houses which had already been built for us.
During that time, when you first met the militia in Chaktom cooperative, did you reveal to them that you were actually Khmer Crown?
At that time, I dare not tell them that I was from Khmer Crown. I concealed my identity and my place of birth since I was informed of that in Takao province.
Thank you. So you continued to hide your identity, and you had also changed your surname, as you told us earlier, from Chow to Lon. Did you feel that if the Khmer Rouge militia in Chaktom had known that you and your family were Khmer Crown, that you may have been killed?
President, witness, please wait. The National Council for Khieu Samphan, you may proceed. Kong Samon, thank you, Mr. President. I am objecting to this question as it is a speculative question. President, your objection is appropriate. Civil party, you are instructed not to respond to the last question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll rephrase and ask a new line of questioning. Mr. Chowni, you've confirmed to the court that you did not reveal your identity as Khmer Krom and that there were many terrible things that were being said about the new people when you were in Chaktom. Can you describe any public speeches that were made by the Khmer Rouge militia to you, your family, and other people in Chaktom Cooperative?
When I was at the Chaktom Cooperative, they didn't say anything else. Because by that time we were asked to focus on the rice production to gather forces to engage in the production in order to at least harvest 2 or 3 times per year and to receive the 3 tons per hectare plan. So everyone strive their best to engage in the daily activity in the rice production. And we were forced to work hard. We barely had a time for break.
Can you describe to the court how much food you were given on a daily basis while you were in Chaktom for you and your family?
In that cooperative, we cannot say about a meal per day, but per each meal we were only given a very one ladle of a very watery gruel.
Was this enough for you and your family, which included the 3 young children?
Of course, at that time the food was insufficient. We spent a lot of our strength in the labor work, and of course the food given to us was very little. And we cannot compare the strength that we spent in our work to the food that was given to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chowni. You've mentioned that it affected the strength of the people who were engaged in the labor. How did the lack of food affect the young children in your family, Chow Soon, Chow Yet, and Chow Lapang?
Due to the lack of food, my 3 nephews, including my other sibling, got sick and died. My nephews, before they died, they were in a very pitiful stage. Even if the food that was coming out amongst the feces, they ate that food as well. Even for my brother, before he died, he only begged for a small piece of a sugar, a palm sugar, but we could not find the palm sugar for him before he died. And my elder sister-in-law tries to find the sugar, but when she arrived, her husband already passed away.
We're sorry to have to put you through all of this again, Mr. Chowni, but just for the benefit of the court and the evidence, I will ask you a few more questions on this point. You mentioned that the young children, your nephews, and your elder brother was very sick and passed away were they ever given any medicine by the Khmer Rouge militia in Chaktom?
When the young children were sick, there was nothing else for their treatment except the rabbit pellet. Whatever diseases or conditions they were in, the only treatment for them were the rabbit pellet or the pellet dropped. That kind of pellet was given to all the patients and nothing else.
To the best of your knowledge, did anybody's health improve because of having the rabbit pellets as medicine?
Based on what I saw, because when my nephews who got serious diarrhea, they took that rabbit pellet tablets and 3 hours later they died.
Thank you, Mr. Chowni. You mentioned earlier to the court that the Chaktom cooperative was led by Tahui. It was originally known as Tahui Cooperative. Can you describe anything that he has said to you or the other people in the cooperative when he spoke to all of you?
The language that they used for the 17 April people were very unpleasant. Nothing else besides that. They kept scolding us, they accused us of being capitalists, etc.
Thank you. Mr. Chowni, if I can just refer the court to your statement, D22/253. This is ERN number in English 004784880. In Khmer, the ERN number is 004215999.
President Council, could you please repeat the document number and the ERN number slower than your pace so that the interpreter can properly render the translation?
Much obliged, Your Honor. I will repeat it again. This is the victim statement, D22/253, ERN number in English 004784880, ERN number in Khmer 004215999, and in French 00858937. Mr. Chowni, in this statement, you mentioned that the cooperative, as you've just told the court, was led by a man named Tahui. Tahui, you mentioned, was also known as Smiling Cold Murderer. Could you please tell the court why he had this nickname and reputation?
At that time, I didn't know why he got that nickname, but he was known as a smiling cold murderer, and his name was actually Ta Hơi.
And could you describe the living conditions under Ta Hơi during that time? Would you have either witnessed or heard about any killings that happened under his leadership or disappearances?
While I was living there, I did not personally witness any killing by him, but I believe the nickname that was given to him, it would indicate that he had killed people somewhere. But from my observation, the number of the population in the cooperative decreased gradually. However, I did not have a personal knowledge as whether they were transferred somewhere else or the number decreased because of the death.
Thank you, Mr. Chowni. So apart from the decrease in the population in Chaktom, to the best of your knowledge, what were the food, water, and medical supplies for the other people in addition to your family? Did anybody have better food, more water, better medicine, or did everybody have the same as you?
Regarding clean water, we never had any clean water. We drank water from whichever ponds that we could find. And sometimes we fetch the water from the pond to our house. And of course, there was no medicine for our treatment. And when we were sick, no medical treatment was provided except the rabbit pellet. When my other brother was sick, he didn't want to go to the hospital because usually when people were sick and went to the hospital, they died quicker than staying at home. Because when we went to the hospital, the food ration that we received while we worked would be cut off.
So to clarify and to repeat just what you just said, Mr. Chowni, the food and water that you might receive if you were to go to the hospital may even be less than ordinary times? Is that correct?
As for the water we could fetch it from any pond. But of course, it was not clean water. When we were thirsty, while we were working, we would go and fetch the water from the pond. And of course, there was no medicine for us while we were sick. And for those people who went to the hospital, their food ration would be cut off.
Could you tell us roughly how many families were living at that time or forced to live in Chaktom? In addition to your family, how many families were living there?
As I stated earlier, when we initially arrived at Chaktom Cooperative, there were a large number of families. It means there were hundreds of people. There were 3 rows of houses, but I could not say for sure as to the exact number. But later on, the houses were still there, but people were no longer living in those houses, and I did not know what happened to them.
Thank you. You've mentioned that while the houses remained, the number of people who were in that cooperative steadily decreased. Mr. Chowni, if you could just clarify for us as well, you said earlier that both Mr. Tahui, as well as other KR militia, spoke to the people living in Chaktom to say that you must change your capitalist ways and your feudalist ways. What did they mean by this, and why did they want you to change?
Response. The Khmer Rouge would use the same language to every 17th of April person. They did not want us to do the things we normally did.
Did they ever explain to you why they did not want you to do the things you usually did as 17th of April people, and why you were forced to live in that cooperative?
Response. At every place, people would be made to live in the cooperative, and no one could escape. That was part of the Communist Party of Kampuchea's policy, that everyone had to live in the cooperative, and no one could contest such policy. The President Council, please be reminded again that the scope of the examination should always be within the evacuation period, of course the first and the second phase of the evacuation, and the time frame shall also be within this context as well. And we hope that questions would only be put to the civil party concerning the period of about 3 months during the evacuation, and the structure of the cooperative, for example, is not part of the segment of the trial as yet.
Thank you, Your Honor. Much obliged for that reminder. I will keep my questions strictly within the purview of this phase of the forced transfer that we're discussing. Mr. Chownie, I just have a few more questions for you, because you've been very helpful, I think, to the court thus far. You mentioned earlier that the majority of the people who were living in Chaktom, who had come with you on the train and were transferred, were new people. You've also told the court that there were clear discrimination against the new people. My last question on this point would be, you've also said to the court that you never revealed your identity as a Khmer Crown. You continued to hide it, as you did in Trapayang Sab village in Takeo. Did you know of anyone else in Chaktom who would mention that they were Khmer Crown? Did anyone else reveal their identity?
Response. No, none of us would reveal our identity as a Khmer Crown.
In the course of your transfer, when you were asked to be on the train that went towards Battambang, towards Mongrisay, at any time, was there an opportunity for you or your family to not obey the orders of the Khmer Rouge militia? And did you ever try to escape?
Response. At that time, I did not have the courage to disobey the orders by the party whatever order it was, I had to respect.
And was this the same, from what you know, to the best of your knowledge, was this the same for the other people in your family and the others living in Chaktom together with you? Did you see anybody being able to leave by their own accord or escaping?
Response: No, I haven't seen anyone escaping.
Thank you. Mr. Chowni, you will have an opportunity later on, as the court has kindly indicated, to talk about your suffering. So I will not go into these details at this point in time. But is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your time in Chaktom in 1976 and 1977, which we should know about in relation to yourself and your family?
Response: At that cooperative, a lot of people died of food shortages and starvation.
Mr. President, Your Honors, in the interests of time and for efficiency, I shall conclude my questions at this point.
The President, we thank you, Counsel. We would like now to hand over to the prosecution to put some questions to the civil party.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honours, Counsel. Good afternoon, Mr. Chowni. My name is Tariq Abdul Haq. I am from the Office of the Co-Prosecutors, and I will ask you a few more questions on behalf of myself and my colleague. And my questions will relate to your departure from Phnom Penh, firstly, and then we'll have a few more questions about your transfer to Battambang. So if I can return first to the 17th of April, I just want to clarify one thing first. You told my colleagues earlier that the Khmer Rouge entered the city on the 17th of April, and that after that there was an announcement that people had to leave. When was the first time you heard this announcement that you had to leave the city? Was it on the same day, 17th of April, or was it after that?
Response: I heard this announcement after the 17th of April. I didn't hear it during the same day of the 17th of April.
And when you saw soldiers that came near your home and ordered you and your family to depart, was that the day immediately following the 17th of April? In other words, was that on the 18th of April, or was it some days after, if you recall?
Response: It was about 2 or 3 days afterwards.
Thank you. When you were told to leave, could you describe what was happening in the rest of your neighbourhood? You told us you lived in an area near the Olympic market. What was happening to other people, your neighbours?
Response. Upon having heard that the Khmer Rouge asked us to leave Phnom Penh, the people in the city panicked and had to find a way to get out of the city. That happened to every family, including mine. And we could not be reluctant to leave the city because we had to leave the city by the orders.
You may have already answered this question, but in order to remove any uncertainty, based on what you observed, were those who were sick, for example, or elderly, who may find it difficult to move, were they permitted to stay?
Response. I didn't check at homes when I left Phnom Penh, but by the time I reached National Road number 2, I saw the elderly and sick people who were lying on the roads, and no one could help them.
During that time, the 17th of April and the days following, do you know or did you see any soldiers or officers belonging to the Lon Nol government? And do you know what they did or what happened to them?
Response. On the 17th of April, I saw a few Lon Nol soldiers congratulate the victory of by the Khmer Rouge. However, by the time I left Phnom Penh, I never saw any of the Lon Nol soldiers again.
So during your transfer from Phnom Penh to Takao, you never saw any Lon Nol soldiers anymore. Is that what you're telling us?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
Thank you. Now, you said when my colleagues were putting questions to you that you were told by the Khmer Rouge soldiers that you had to leave and that the city would be bombarded by the American Air Force. Was there any bombardment of Phnom Penh following the 17th of April?
Response. No, I didn't hear any bombs being dropped, but I did hear some gunfire. I never heard any bombs dropped by the American warplanes.
Now, you were told that, you told us earlier this morning, that you would only be required to leave Phnom Penh for 3 days to avoid this bombardment. And then later on en route, you decided to head for the area known as Kampuchea Krom. During those days, as there was no bombardment, did you ever ask to return to Phnom Penh in light of the fact that there was no crisis as apparently had been anticipated?
Response. I'm afraid I cannot quite understand your question. Are you asking me about the time when I was immediately evacuated from Phnom Penh, or when I was traveling on the railway tracks?
Thank you. It was a confusing question. At any point in the days and weeks following your departure from Phnom Penh, did you ever ask to return to Phnom Penh, given that there had been no bombing?
Response. I received no news. I did not know or did not receive any news concerning the bombs drop, or I never knew anything about whether we would be allowed to return to Phnom Penh. But my family and I were attempting to go to our hometown, to Cambodia Crown.
Thank you. Now, just staying on that topic of your journey from Phnom Penh, as you travelled along the roads, did you see Khmer Rouge soldiers along the roads assisting or guiding the civilians as they were en route from the city?
Response. No, I didn't. I didn't see any of the Lon soldiers assisting any of the evacuees.
There might have been a translation issue. My question was about Khmer Rouge troops, whether there were any Khmer Rouge troops on the roads as you were walking out of the city towards Takeo.
Response. No Khmer Rouge soldier assisted us or provided us with any food or assistance. We all together, the evacuees, had to be on our own.
Now, moving on to your next journey, when you boarded a train, which, as you told us, delivered you to Battambang, or to Mong Rasay district in Battambang. You told us that when you boarded the train, there were already other passengers on the train. Can I ask you first to describe what type of train this was? Was it a passenger train or a transport train?
Response. When the train stopped, I did not take notice whether the cars were meant for freight or for passengers. However, the car that we were on was no goods inside. They were packed with people only. However, I cannot say whether in other cars there would be goods or other cargoes. I don't know.
Thank you. If you can describe for us just the car that you were in, was it an ordinary train that is used to carry passengers? That particular carriage you were on, was it a carriage that's normally used for passengers, or was it a different type of carriage?
Response. I frankly did not know which kind of carriage or car would be used to carry passengers or goods, but we were placed in a car where we could sit face to face with other passengers.
Thank you. Now, were you able to find out where the other passengers had come from?
Response. I didn't ask other passengers any question. We were very quiet and patient. We only listened to the orders and we waited until the next station that we would be allowed to stop and leave the train. And the other people who shared the same car did not even ask us any questions.
You told one of my colleagues earlier that you were not allowed to talk to one another on the train. Can you tell us why it was that you were unable to talk to the others? Was that a particular order you were given?
Response. I still remember very clearly, and indeed I learned from what I was told at the cow. I had to be very careful when speaking because I speak with dialect. I am originally from Khmer Kram, so the way I speak is not different from. It's not the same as the way ordinary Cambodian speaks. So if I said anything, people could identify me immediately that I was originally from the Khmer Kram.
Now, based on what you observed in those days, did you understand that those other people that were travelling were forced to travel like you were, or were they travelling voluntarily?
Response. Having noted passengers who shared the same train with me, I believe that they were like passengers like our family.
When you say like your family, do you mean that like your family they were forced to travel to Battambang?
Response. Yes, that's what I was saying.
And in that group, if you could describe for us, were there men, women, children, elderly? Could you describe that group for us, the people that you saw?
Response. There was a mixture of people on the train. There were elderly people, the young children, and men and women.
When you arrived in Battambang, did you ever see more trains or more people come from other parts of the country, like you did on train?
Response. After leaving the train to be received by the ox carts, I never saw what happened again at the train station.
Now, I might be asking you a question you've already answered, but if you could answer just for the clarity of the record. When you arrived at Muang Rusay station and you disembarked from the train, were you able to go in any direction that you chose, or were you told to go to a particular cooperative?
Response. At that time, there was no choice. The ox carts were at the ready to pick us.
And this might be my final question, Mr. Chowney. Again, as you disembarked from the train, were you able to see approximately how many people there were on that particular train?
Response. I can estimate the number to be several thousand.
And did all of those several thousand people disembark at the same stop where you disembarked in Muang Rusay?
Response. Some passengers would be transported to my location, while others would continue their journey elsewhere.
And as far as you were able to observe, were all of those passengers guarded by Khmer Rouge soldiers?
Response. When in the train, there were some people wearing black clothes who were walking past us every now and then.
In the interest of time, I'm going to end my questions there. And thank you, Mr. Chowney, for coming to the court and giving your evidence. We wish you safe travels, and we thank Your Honours for the time allocated to us.
The President, Judge Lavigne, you may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chowney. Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few questions to clarify one or two items. Now, you spoke to us about your fear that it might be discovered that you were a Cambodian from Kampuchea Krom. And you told us about how you felt that the Khmer Krom were the object of a certain kind of discrimination. So what I'm going to ask you about is whether that particular fear existed as of the evacuation of Phnom Penh, or if it's something that emerged at a later stage.
Immediately after the liberation, I did not know that the Khmer Rouge would incriminate against the Khmer Rouge, the Khmer Crown. Only later, when I was transferred, I was fearful of being incriminated as a Khmer Crown.
And before 17 April 1975, were you aware of any kind of possible discrimination or of any kind of special attitude that the Khmer Rouge may have vis-à-vis the Khmer Krom? How would the Khmer Rouge behave, as far as you know?
Based on what I saw and what I observed, the Khmer Rouge people, when they were in the forest, they did not discriminate against any race or ethnic minority. But once they took complete control of Phnom Penh, I realized the Khmer Rouge discriminated against the people.
And did you take part in political training sessions, in self-criticism sessions, where this issue of the Khmer Krom was brought up? And you know possibly why the Khmer Krom were being discriminated against?
No, I did not attend such a meeting.
And do you know, and how do you know, why the Khmer Krom were discriminated against in this way, as far as you know?
Initially, I did not think that the Khmer Rouge would discriminate against the Khmer Crown. Even while I was in the camp, that I was advised to hide my background, I was still suspicious about that. Then, only after 1979, I went to look for my great uncle and other relatives who died at the Tulslai. I read the Khmer Rouge regulation. I am unsure whether it was Article 8 or 9. It stated something to the effect that don't blame the other about the Khmer Crown so that you could be freed.
For the purposes of the record, could you please repeat your last sentence? Because it was not interpreted. You told us about what you had read at Tulslane.
When people told me in the cave, I did not pay much attention regarding the concealment of my Khmer Krom identity. And only after the liberation in 1979, I went searching for my relatives, and I went inside Tulslai prison, searching for the photos of my relatives, whether they died in Tulslai. And there I saw the Khmer Rouge slogan, which was written on the wall. I believed it was either Article 8 or 9, which states that don't say that you are the Khmer Rouge so that you can be Don't say that you are the Khmer crown so that you could be spared. That's how I saw it there.
I would like to revisit the situation in Phnom Penh on 17 April 1975. As far as I understand, your brother had a position in the Lon Nol army. And can you tell us what the military situation was then, and how did your brother react? Did he try to hide? Did he receive any special kind of instructions?
In my application and statement, my brother-in-law was not serving in the military. He worked in a bank. I never said he was a Lon Nol soldier.
I apologize. It's my mistake. Thank you very much, Civil Party. I have no further questions to put to you.
President, the time is now appropriate for a short break. We will take a 15-minute break, and we shall return at a at 10 to 3, rather, so that we can resume our hearing. Court officer, could you assist the civil party during the break? And have him return to the courtroom at 10 to 3. I notice the defense counsel is on his feet. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought I may be able to assist the chamber. We have no questions for the civil party. I'm informed that my colleagues have no more questions, just to give you an idea of the timing for the rest of the day. Thank you.
President, thank you for the information. What about the other two defense teams? Counsel, as raised by Mr. Inuji, I think it is practical for us to continue without taking the break, so that we can hear the statement of suffering by this civil party, as we do not have any questions for him. Counsel, Mr. President, from the Kiev Sampon's defense team, we do not have any question for this civil party. President, thank you for the information. I think we need to change now, then we don't need to take a break, and we can continue with the hearing of the testimony of this civil party. Mr. Chowny, as you've been advised from the outset that you will be given an opportunity to express your suffering and harms that you received during the Democratic Cambodia period. If you wish to do so, you may take the floor. Civil Party, Mr. President, I'd like to put a proposition to Mr. President and the prosecution and some questions for Kiew Sampon. One of my uncles had some connection with Kiew Sampon. President, Defense Counsel for Khieu Samphan, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe my statement might be a bit superfluous, but I wish to do so for the purposes of the record. I believe that it is important for the civil parties to express themselves before this chamber and to express the suffering they went through. It is, however, not appropriate for them to refer directly to one of the accused persons like this, and therefore the chamber should be aware of this again. Once again, the contours of this trial are perfectly clear, so it's important for the civil party that we remind the civil party of the rules that govern this chamber.
President, the international lawyer for civil parties, you may proceed.
President, I understand that this may be unprecedented, but I also note that there is no preclusion in the internal rules which prevents a civil party from making a general observation to the defense in the course of his statement on his suffering. So I would urge your honors to allow this to happen. Thank you.
President, I think you are now trying to take turn to be on your feet. And now decide to give the floor to the defense team. And Mr. Angodam, you may proceed. So let me finish all the statements from one side. And please state it clearly before I give the floor to the other side. And you just cannot be on your feet at whichever time you wish to do so. And thank you, Mr. President. My apology for my interruption. I'd like to have a few words for the Chamber's consideration. In fact, the civil party has the right to make a statement, but here before this court, we also consider the right of the accused. In case of Khieu Samphan, he exercises his right to remain silent, and I hope that the chamber will consider that right. Any other matter to be of concern? The prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. We won't take up a lot of time at all. We want to support our friends, Counsel for the Civil Parties. We agree there is no prohibition on civil parties making a general statement as to their suffering. If a statement refers to one of the accused, there's absolutely no prohibition on that. It's for your honours to weigh the probative value of any statement given in court. I would note that, of course, accused have a right to comment on civil party statements in court, and your honours have made that accommodation throughout this trial. And finally, as a footnote and a correction to my learned friend, Counsel for Ying Seri, as we understand the position, Mr. Khieu Samphan is not exercising his right to remain silent, but rather choosing to give statements at particular stages in the trial and decide a particular time at which he may answer questions in later stages of the proceedings. Thank you.
President, Mr. Khieu Samphan, can you advise the chamber whether you are still exercising your right to remain silent? As you have heard, this civil party has some questions for you. Khieu Samphan, Mr. President, I made my interventions in the past, and as I recall, I reserves my right to make comments on the paragraphs that Mr. President required me to make comments. Nonetheless, I clearly stated that I wish not to respond to any questions posed to me. I need to wait for all the presentation of all the evidence, and by the conclusion of the trial, I will eventually respond to all the questions. And this is my position. I'm grateful, Mr. President. President, thank you. It is clear that this issue is related to the right not to respond by the accused, and he expressly indicated his position, and he still maintained that position. For that reason, there is no need to give the floor to the civil party to put questions to him. President, civil party, you can put questions. However, your questions are to go through me as the president of this chamber. Then I will decide whether your questions will be redirected to Kisampon or not. You cannot put your question directly to the accused Kisampon. Civil party, Mr. President, the questions that I have for Kisampon is nothing of a revenge nature. My question is the following. On the 17th April 1975, that is at the liberation, Kisampon wrote a letter of invitation to my uncle, that is Chao Sao, to return to Phnom Penh. And I want to know the reason why. And did Kisampon eventually meet with my uncle? That is my first question. And my second question is that the driver of Mr. Chao Sao in 1979, I met him in Phnom Penh, and he said that when Chao Sao was evacuated and upon reaching Prekadam, there were 2 soldiers who delivered a letter from Kisampon to him. And the content of that letter stated that Mr. Chao Sao is required to return to Phnom Penh. However, Chao Sao refused. He said that he would only return to Phnom Penh when all the Phnom Penh residents were allowed to return. And subsequently, the 2 soldiers returned for the second time, inviting him to come to Phnom Penh again, and he still refused. And from that time onward, Mr. Chao Sao disappeared. My question to Mr. Kisampon is, where did he die? This or what I want to know. So if I know where he died, I would try to find his skeleton remains so that I can make a religious ceremony for his soul. President, Mr. Kisampon, are you in a position to respond to these questions, and whether you know the location where Mr. Chao Sao died? President, I put the question to Kisampon Council. The question is not for due defense counsel, and he has the right whether to respond or not to respond.
Mr. President, I apologize, but I do have something to say.
Once again, the question I put is to put to Khieu Samphan. Council, you may be seated. The floor is now given to Khieu Samphan, and the chamber would like to know whether Mr. Khieu Samphan still reserves his rights to remain silent, or if he wishes to respond as to where Mr. Chao Sao died. Mr. Khieu Samphan, you may stand.
Mr. President, I will ask them.
Mr. President, interrupt. The question is put to Mr. Khieu Samphan and he can respond. Khieu Samphan, Mr. President, I'd like to ask the question to the President. If I respond to this question, does it affect my rights to remain silent? If it does not affect my rights to remain silent, then I can respond. Mr. President, that is your right, Mr. Accused, because you do not expressly express yourself that you absolutely reserve your rights to remain silent. You have expressed limited right to remain silent. So this is your discretion, whether you wish to respond to this question or you maintain your right to be silent. The decision is yours. Mr. President, Mr. Khieu Samphan, could you repeat your statement because I do not hear it properly? And Defense Counsel for Khieu Samphan, please remain seated. All parties remain seated. The floor is given to Mr. Khieu Samphan alone.
Your Honor, we take great exception to
The floor is not given to you, Counsel. Counsel, please be seated. President, Mr. Khieu Samphan, you may proceed. Khieu Samphan. My apology, Mr. Khieu Samphan. I delegate my right to my defense counsel as my representative. And personally, from the outset, that I eventually will respond to all questions once the hearing on evidence is concluded at the end of this trial. That is all. President, Mr. Civil Party, Mr. Khieu Samphan declines to respond to your question as he reserves his right to remain silent. So your questions will not be answered by him. And now, Mr. Civil Party, do you still wish to make your statement of suffering and the harms inflicted upon you throughout the Democratic Cambodia regime? Civil Party, Mr. President, I am greatly disappointed as he declines to respond to my question. Of course, Mr. Kisampon knows my uncle very well. They had meals together. And of course, he should know where his skeleton remains is. And he should not refuse to respond to this question. What I want to know is to know where he died, so that I can take his skeleton remains for the religious ceremony. And for that reason, even if I am here, my suffering still remains. It doesn't go away, because I don't have the answer. I am here before this court of law, and I still cannot get his response as to where my uncle died. I personally do not have any revenge against him. I just want to know, I just want him to tell me where he died, so that I can go and get his skeleton remains for the religious ceremony. That is all. And if he doesn't know Chao San, I can show him the photo of Chao San. If you no longer remember his facial expression, of course I can show you the photo, and you should not refuse to see it. President Civil Party, do you have anything else to make? Civil Party, that is all, Mr. President. President, thank you indeed, Mr. Chowny. And the hearing of your testimony has come to a conclusion. You are now excused, and your testimony may contribute to ascertaining the truth. And as a result, you may return to your residence or wherever you wish to go. We wish you all the best and bon voyage. Court officer, please, in cooperation with the WISU, make a necessary arrangement for the civil party to return to his residence or wherever he wishes to go. Mr. Chowny, you may now leave the courtroom. President, the floor is now given to the parties. If you wish to make any observation regarding the testimony of the civil party Chao Ni, who just concluded his testimony.
Monsieur le Président, je souhaiterais prendre la parole à ce stade.
I'd like to take the floor at this stage, if I may, Mr. President.
President, as I just stated, the floor is given to any party who wishes to make any observation regarding the testimony of the civil party Chao Ni. And whether it is your observation that his responses or some of his responses are outside of the scope of the facts limited in case 002/01, and all other matters will not be allowed. That is the purpose of the floor given for the observation made by the party to the testimony, if there is any.
Oui, précisément, Monsieur le Président.
Precisely, Mr. President, it's about the statement by the civil party.
La première, c'est que oui, effectivement.
My first point is that yes, indeed, there are elements
On peut parler de déclaration puisqu'il
in the statement, it was a statement, but there were also questions that do not fall within the purview of what the Chamber has said about statements by civil parties at the conclusion of their testimony before the Chamber. The statement by the civil party did fall outside the framework of trial segment 002/1, but I would also publicly like to express my astonishment, indeed shock, at the procedure that was followed today in the Chamber. It's not just a matter for the civil party to talk about his suffering, but also to bring probative evidence into a statement. And apart from the fact that this falls outside the scope of 002/1 of this trial, also raises a problem connected with the rights of the defence, because if my understanding is correct, once a witness's hearing on the facts is completed, we, the defence, have no longer any right to ask the civil party any questions. So once the civil party, when making a statement about suffering to the Chamber, falls outside the framework of a simple statement, we are bound and gagged because we cannot come back on issues of probative evidence. Because apart from the fact that they may fall outside the scope of this trial segment, there are also issues which take my client directly to task. I am a defence lawyer, and yet, in this instance, unable to question the civil party in return. So we have a very significant procedural issue to deal with here. I would like the Chamber to decide upon it in the future, because if in further statements by civil parties which come to testify in this Chamber, we have a series of statements which bring in new elements about the facts of the period, and we on the defence side are unable to ask questions to these same people because we have reached the conclusion phase of the civil party's testimony. That means, once again, that the defence's right to ask questions is being curtailed. And I do not find that acceptable. It's an extreme violation of the rights of the defence, and publicly I wish to stress that particular fact. Once again, it has never been said before this Chamber that statements by civil parties were designed for putting questions to the accused. It is particularly regretful that in this room we have only Mr. Kyosampan, by virtue of his better health, as the only accused person in the room, and he then is taken to task by one of the civil parties, and that is simply not acceptable in a framework of normal procedure. The civil party who was present was talking about issues that were not connected with his particular suffering, but to do with a particular issue of probative evidence that I, in my position, have absolutely no capacity whatsoever to respond to, because the civil party has reached the end of his statement. I think that in a criminal court that is particularly inadmissible, and we cannot accept it.
The President, National Co-Counsel for Mr. Kyosampan, you may have the floor now. Counsel for Kyosampan. Thank you, Mr. President. I may have a brief observation concerning the statement of suffering by the civil party just now. He indicated that he would like to pose a question to Mr. Kyosampan to look for the place where his uncle could have died. I believe that it is not part of the story being examined during this segment of the trial or this court, and the court is not obliged to locate the dead body or where the person could have died. And there is no clue or evidence to prove that Mr. Kyosampan could have been the person who have executed that person who has caused the death of his uncle. And the reason that the civil party stated about the letter written by Mr. Kilsompon, there is no way to prove that the letter is genuine or whether Kilsompon has actually written such a letter. So what the civil party indicated or raised was baseless, and that it falls outside the ambit of the scope of the proceeding. The President, Council, please be seated. We have to deliberate on this first. The President, we would like to now hand over to Judge Lavergne to address the concern raised by counsel for Mr. Kilsompon. You may proceed, Judge Lavergne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin with an observation. The civil party was given the floor to express himself on the subject of his suffering, and I believe that it was clear for everybody that part of the suffering that he wanted to air concerning his uncle, Monsieur Cho Sang, someone who disappeared during the evacuation of Phnom Penh, and that what he was bringing up was perfectly relevant to the framework of this part of the case. Now, we are working in a civil law framework here as well, and as far as I'm aware, the civil parties are parties. They are allowed to ask questions, and the accused are also entitled to exercise their right to remain silent. I do not see in what way the rights of the defense have been breached. If the civil party's statement was going to bring up issues about which the defence might have wanted to ask questions, then indeed we could have heard a request from you to that effect, and we might have perfectly well given you the floor. But I do not see the interest in the procedure, and I hope that I have been clear on that.
Excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président, j'aurais une petite demande de clarification à
Excuse me, Mr. President. I would like to ask Judge Leven for a small point of clarification. Should I therefore understand that when civil parties bring up in their statements new facts that have not been referred to when they were questioned by the different parties, if there are new issues that come up, as indeed was the case in the civil parties hearing we have heard just now, because at the earlier stage there was never any reference to this letter written to my client or the question of the disappearance of his uncle, subsequent to possible contacts with my client. Does this mean that in the future we therefore are authorized to ask questions after the statement by the civil party? And in this particular instance, am I therefore entitled to put further questions to the civil party outside of what has already been mentioned in the statement by the civil parties? Judge Laverne, I don't think you've ever been denied that right. If it appears necessary in seeking the truth, then I think such questions are fully authorized and acceptable. Counsel. Therefore, Mr. President, I would like to ask your permission to ask further questions to the civil party on what he said about correspondence between somebody and my client.
The President, the Chamber would not wish to continue this case as the civil party has already been excused and has been returned to his home, and the accused person has already made clear that he would exercise his right to remain silent. Precisely. The hearing comes to an end today. The Chamber would adjourn now, and the next session will be on Tuesday, the 4th of December 2012. On Tuesday, the 4th of December, the Chamber will be hearing TCCP 188. Questions will be put by the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties before the other parties. Please be informed. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Kiew Sampon and Noon Jie back to the detention center and have them returned to the courtroom by the 4th of December 2012 by 9 a.m. The court is adjourned.
Your Honor, is it not the case that all the parties get to make a comment on the suffering? And I had one question. That last ruling, was that the Chamber's ruling, or was that Judge Cartwright's ruling, as it appeared to be? I'll ask you again the next time. Thank you.